Our next guest brought to you by the Arnold Palmer Design Whistler Golf Club, reminding you that tee times for any time during the 2024 season can be booked online right now. Get those tee time reserved. Get them reserved well in advance to avoid disappointment. And if you have a group of 12 or more, enter Arnie's Army Golf Getaway contest where you and 11 friends can play for free. To book a tee time or to enter the contest, visit whistlergolf.com. Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, the host of Rinkwide Vancouver, joins us on Mondays.
And he would be amongst my 11 friends. But
you made the cut, Jeff.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. My day is made. My week is made.
I just don't have that many friends that play golf. So you'd have to, yeah.
Catching up with you after last week, Jeff, which turned out to be a busy week for the Vancouver Canucks with the announcement of the coaching staff. Just first of all, what do you make of all the comings and goings? Yogi, Manny, and the way they're going to divvy up power play and penalty kill.
Yeah, I'm delighted for Yogi. This is a guy that has worked his way through the ranks from a skills coach to the Vancouver Giants to Delta's Academy, getting a first-time job in the National Hockey League. That's not easy, and he has earned his stripes here. So I'm delighted to see a guy get promoted from within. I said this last week on Rinkwide that the one sort of caveat in all of this, and these are two separate thoughts, because I am truly happy for Yogi Sekeres to see a guy get this opportunity that he's worked for. But he was here. He was part of this group that watched the power play wither and ultimately die down the stretch and into the playoffs. I did wonder if there was an opportunity for the Vancouver Canucks to go outside the organization and find somebody that wasn't attached to this group that could have brought a fresh set of eyes and maybe some thoughts as well. I thought it was interesting on the same day that the Canucks promoted their skills coach to a bench coach. The Toronto Maple Leafs were busy hiring a guy with NHL head coaching experience in Lane Lambert to work Craig Berube's staff. So there are lots of ways that you can round out an NHL coaching staff. The Leafs obviously did their way, and the Canucks are giving a guy who's been knocking on the door here, who has been part of this group. And look, Rick Tocchet spoke at length, and I believe it because I've been there. I've seen the practices that Rick empowers guys like Yogi Sekeres, who wasn't an assistant coach. He was the skills coach, but he was at the whiteboard. He was drawing up practice plays. He was working with guys well after practice. And I use Dakota Joshua as a great example here, because I remember when I went down to Seattle in February, Dakota Joshua and Carson Soucy were both out of the lineup. They were getting closer. They came out in full gear after the Canucks had their morning skate. And Yogi he didn't crack the whip. It wasn't a bag skate. He was working on these guys to prepare them for their re-entry to the lineup. So when you say a skills coach, those are some of the things that he was doing behind the scenes. Dakota Joshua gets back in the lineup after the hand injury that took him out for 6 weeks, and he had his goal-scoring touch right away. It was almost as if he didn't leave the lineup, and he gave credit to Slavkovsky, and I think Rick Tocchet certainly saw the benefits of what a coach has done, to the point that I asked on the Zoom call last week, Rick, are you going to replace Yogi? And he said, absolutely. Like, we see real value in having a full-time skills coach in addition to our coaching staff. So let's see how it works out. But this is a guy that's universally liked. I loved Rick's line about when guys would come into the office and he'd say, hey, are you looking for me? And they'd say, nope, we're looking for Yogi. I thought that kind of sort of spoke volumes about the respect that the head coach sees in this person now that he has brought on to his staff. So are they far less experienced with Mike Yeo, who was a 2-time head coach at the National Hockey League level? He walks out the door. Manny, a first-time head coach in professional hockey, but a guy that's respected through and through. But yeah, I mean, there are some elements that they're going to have to work through. And look, Rick is the reigning head coach of the year, the Jack Adams winner. And he said, it's going to be on me now to bring this group together. But he talked about how excited he was, how much respect he had for Manny Malhotra. Said he didn't know him a ton, but had met him a few times, was impressed with a presentation that he did at a coaching symposium here when the draft was in Vancouver back in 2019. And I just think we all remember covering Manny as a player. He was respected then. That same respect has traveled with him through the ranks as he's been an assistant coach and then worked his way to a bench coach in Toronto and now taking over as a head coach. So let's see what he can do. Obviously, in tie-ins with Daniel and Henrik right away. And of course, they're going to be involved. And when that press release came out and said the Sedins would take a more active role in the coaching side of things, look, they're on the ice at almost every Canucks practice. They still find time to get out to Abbotsford. So I wasn't really sure what that meant, but ultimately we found out that one of them At least one of them is going to travel on any lengthy road trip. So I think anytime you can have Daniel and Henrik hands-on, it's a good day for the Vancouver Canucks and the organization.
Is that your power play upgrade there, Jeff? Is it when you talk about, a new voice? Did you ever see them at the whiteboard before? Because maybe now you will. Maybe that's the new voice on the power play.
The one thing we saw with the power play, and I have not seen this with the other coaches that I've covered in my time working around the Vancouver Canucks, was that Rick and Mike Yeo would be at one end of the ice working with the first unit. Daniel and Henrik were responsible for the second unit. Like, there really was a division of power based on the two groups that the Canucks were running out there on the power play. You heard Rick in his Zoom last week talk about the fact that he's going to give a lot of the responsibilities to Yogi Sekeres, but it's not carte blanche, that Rick is a guy that still wants a hand in all of this. And ultimately, he's the head coach and the buck stops with him. But this is where I come back to this idea that even though Yogi didn't have the title, he was out there on the ice around this team, and nobody, whether it was Daniel or Henrik or Rick or Yogi Sekeres, I mean, they all watched as this power play really struggled down the stretch after the All-Star break. And we know it cost them in the playoffs. Like, there were opportunities for this team to get ahead and rise above if they could have cashed in on the power play, and it just wasn't there. So the personnel is in place. We know the component parts are there to have a successful power play. A lot of that's going to depend on, which Elias Pettersson they get back after this long summer. And we'll see where things go from there. But overall, there is something to be said about internal promotion and showing others in the organization that if you work hard, that there is a path to rise to higher levels. And Rick said that he felt Jim Rutherford, or at least Jim Rutherford, had conveyed that, he was a big believer in promoting from within. So, at some point, is there a cost element to it when you have a guy who's been a two-time head coach in Mike Yeo walk away, when you have Jeremy Colleton, who's been an NHL head coach, and he walks away? We may never know, but I do wonder if there were some cost savings as well in all of this for the Vancouver Canucks.
Do you have any structural issues with the fact that no one is singularly responsible for that power play, Jeff? That it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen still?
Yeah, yes, because again, the proof was in the pudding there after the All-Star break. That said, this power play was on fire for the first third of the season at the very least, and they've got to figure out why. What was working for them back then? Was it as simple as having a guy like Andrei Kuzmenko, who, even though he didn't have huge goal-scoring totals, was part of this power play that was working well, because it does sort of line up to the fact that when they moved off him, it just never quite looked and felt the same there. But the same coaching staff and those same sets of eyes, that's where I thought, like, even if you run an exhaustive search and come to the conclusion that Yogi is the guy, I still think there's something to be said about going outside the organization, interviewing others, getting some intel about what the outside world thinks about your operation. And so, I don't know how many assistant coaches or candidates would have been willing to come in with a PowerPoint and tell them what they were, what they'd be willing to do with the power play or how they change it. But I do think that the interview process allows you to exchange some ideas and information and just get a better sense of what others in the hockey world think about the guys that you got and the way that it's working. Now, saying all of that, we saw that part of the power play struggles were that the Edmonton Oilers have just found an absolute another level with their penalty kill, and the Dallas Stars found that out the hard way. We'll see how things go here in the Stanley Cup final. But even against Nashville, the Canucks didn't do an awful lot with the power play. They had opportunities and struggled to cash in when they were provided with those chances. And we saw, certainly after the All-Star break, even in the regular season, the power play was an issue. So they know it. They've spoken about it. And that's a part of the battle, is admitting your flaws and your weaknesses. And now they've got this offseason, hopefully, to breathe some fresh ideas, how to enter the zone, because it wasn't even so much about what they did setting up. So often they couldn't gain the zone and get into their formations. But ultimately, they are going to have to sort this out, because there were too many chances in the playoffs where a power play goal here or there and all these tight games really could have been the difference. And ultimately, it wasn't for the Vancouver Canucks.
Our poll question today, the smoke about re-signing Elias Lindholm last week, Jeff, does that make sense to you given the needs they have on wing and defense?
All along, I've kind of felt that this idea of throwing so much money down the middle is probably a little misguided for the Vancouver Canucks, just with those areas of concerns elsewhere that you mentioned. And we know that they've got to decide, how do they want to shape this defense core? And they've got the two big pieces there that they've got to figure out with Hronek and Zadorov. But also, it's not about running it back with this group, because it was a good team, 50 wins, 109 points. Lindholm, obviously acquired at the trade deadline or at the All-Star break, wasn't here for the full season, but in the playoffs, you got a glimpse of what he can do for this group. But running it back and just keeping this group intact, I mean, yeah, it was fun for 2 rounds, but ultimately it was 7 wins when they needed 16. So the challenge, and Patrick Allvin alluded to it on that exit day when he and Rick Tocchet sat at the podium, he threw down the gauntlet, that he was disappointed, that he knows his job now is to try to figure out in a salary cap world. And we found out over the weekend that, now they know the parameters of just how much money they've got to spend. And they do. They've got some cap resources here to throw at some of those problems. But these are the difficult decisions the Vancouver Canucks are going to have to make. And as we sit here on the 10th of June, the beauty is that we're going to get some answers. Like, they've got to get down to business here. You can't just leave it. You can't, the night before the final exam. It doesn't work that way. Didn't work that way in school. It doesn't work that way in professional sports. So we are going to have to see them make some decisions here sooner rather than later. I just think that, and good, look, Lindholm was good in the playoffs. Like, he was, I thought, one of their more consistent players, and not just producers, but the way that they used him on the penalty kill and faceoffs and late games and matchup and all those types of things. Like, there is value there. I just don't know that it's the prudent play for the Vancouver Canucks, though, to go that deep down the middle when they already knew that they needed an elite scorer on the wings, and they probably need 2, really, if they're going to make headway here and improve. They probably, look, Brock Besser had an incredible season, 40 goals, but does anybody think that when he gets in the starting gate in October that he's now a 40-goal scorer? Like, it goes back to, Ray's line about doing it once doesn't necessarily make you a 40-goal scorer. It's on your hockey card and it's on your record. For, like, I look at Brock Besser, he stayed healthy, which is something that he hasn't done an awful lot over his career. And he had never been a 30-goal scorer. Then he gets to 40. I'd like to think 30 is the true baseline. And, if he can get above that, great. But Nils Höglander was a 24-goal scorer on a 20% shooting clip, where his career average is 12.5. Like, I'm not sitting here thinking that, Nils Höglander got to 24. He's coming back and he's going to build on that. You'd love that. But this is where it comes back to needing a fair bit of help, I think, on the wings still. And so, to me, I'll be disappointed if the Vancouver Canucks don't address that, if they don't make some sort of splash in that area here, either at the draft or through free agency.
What's the better approach here? To have a patchy 3-line team like they had this year with holes in the top 9, or to have certified 2 lines, like 2 full lines with wingers for both? Because I see the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup final, probably just a certified 2-line team. Like, I don't know that you can call their bottom 9 or the bottom 6 really much at all. And I know Nuge moonlights there at times, but really, they are a 2-line team. Can you not win with 2 good lines? Rather, do you need that certified 3rd-line center?
Yeah, and I would say you look at both of these teams in the Stanley Cup final. Zach Hyman and Sam Reinhart finished 2nd and 3rd in the NHL in goals. So they each have like an absolute, lethal finisher. Obviously, the Oilers are a slightly different case just because of McDavid and Draisaitl. But, the Panthers, like, Reinhart hasn't been anywhere close to their best or most productive player in the playoffs. But you've got Carter Verhaeghe, who just shows up every year, it seems. And you got Matthew Tkachuk and all that he's done on, in his resume, and Sasha Barkov. And, like, they are able to sort of stack the tops of their lineup, as you said. And when you look at the Vancouver Canucks, they thought they had one of those types of players in Elias Pettersson, but he got away down the stretch and into the playoffs. You want to believe that player can come back, but they also ran with Ilya Mikheyev. They started the season with Phil DiGiuseppe in their top 6. Like, even Pius Suter was signed as a 3rd-line center. He's versatile, and he gave the Canucks some nice minutes with Miller and Besser, but he was never brought in here as a top 6 guy. And ultimately, he scored the big goal against Nashville to eliminate the Predators, but he had a really quiet second series against the Oilers. And, I just don't think that over the long haul, Pius Suter is a top 6 guy on a Stanley Cup contender. And so These are all the holes that, and I'm sure management recognizes most or all of this, and these are the challenges that they're going to have to address here over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
And if it means Suter has to go back to being third line center, especially if it's just the beginning of the season, and that's something you're going to address by the deadline, that's something I could get behind. Last question here, Jeff. We talked about this some last week after your hit. Joshua, Zadorov, who's the other free agent? Oh, Hronek, of course. If they're going to have to overpay for someone, who are you overpaying for, or are you just steadfastly refusing to overpay any of the free agents on this group?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a fair bit of time here thinking about how you sort of cram all of these in under the cap, and even with the space that they've got. Philip Hronek's in a slightly different silo because of a restricted free agent. I think he understands that he's got the Canucks over a barrel here. If they don't want a long-term, he's got arbitration rights. He's going to get his money, whether people like it or not. It's just the way that the system is set up, that as a restricted free agent with arb rights and a guy that came close to 50 points and played a lot, the counting stats, they're all going to work in his favor here. I think he can sit back, and I think the Vancouver Canucks have decisions to make, and they know that it's going to cost them. If they don't want to go down that road, then they're going to have to look at other avenues. With Zadorov, as much as, and trust me, like, I'm in the same camp as just about everybody. I mean, the person, the player, at playoff time, absolutely. Like, he was huge for the Vancouver Canucks, literally and figuratively. But I also wonder, is, on a Tuesday night in November in Columbus, do you need Nikita Zadorov? If you go into Carolina in February, do you need Nikita Zadorov? The premium comes at playoff time. Like, this is a guy that stepped up, and yes, absolutely, you want the intimidation. You want the fact that he generated offense from the back end. On the depth chart, he's probably the third guy on the left side. But in terms of actual usage in the playoffs, when we saw this, they weren't afraid to elevate him to the point that he was out there as an extra attacker with the goaltender pulled at times and playing the net front presence role. But right now, you got Quinn Hughes and you got Carson Soucy. Can you throw $5 million a year at a left side third pair guy on your depth chart? And
what if he's second pair, Jeff? He was effectively second pair in the postseason. What if you looked at him and said, okay, now he's going to be our top four guy because we're going to shuffle Soucy down? Does that legitimize it for you a little more?
Like, theoretically, yes, but I think Soucy and Myers showed that they're a pair that the Canucks like as a matchup pair, and so I don't see you splitting those two guys. And then it raises this question: if Noah Jules, like Zadorov and Juleson is a second pair, I'm not sure that I'm sold on that as much as I would take Soucy and Myers, even with some of their limitations. And I know that there were a lot of shifts in the playoffs where they got caved, but their size, their length, their reach keeps guys to the outside. It can be effective. Ultimately, it may not always look pretty, but I could see a world in which the Canucks say, "Hey, we're gonna take our lumps with Hronek. He's 26 years of age. He's a nice fit for Quinn Hughes. This is a guy that's really coming into his prime now. We're going to pay whatever it takes to pay. We'll have Hughes, Hronek, Soucy, Myers. There's your top four, and you've got Noah Juleson, who showed that he can play." And then go and find a left side guy for the third pair that's more cost effective, so that you can devote money elsewhere. So I can see a world in which that's the case. I would miss Nikita Zadorov. He was fun to cover. He was fun to watch. So we'll see where it goes there. But I think ultimately, when you think of what they paid to get Hronek, I think he's probably the guy that they recognize that he's going to come at a cost, but he's the right fit for Quinn Hughes, and they're going to try to move forward with those two as their top pair.
The Oilers name checked the Canucks guys last week leading into the Stanley Cup, saying that defense was the hardest, heaviest one. We like there's reason to think, for sure, maybe we should kind of run those guys back.
For the most part, I think you're still squeezing a little more out of Tyler Myers. I mean, eventually, I think the tube runs empty there a little bit, as it did with Ian Cole, I think, by the end of the year.
That's right.
But no, for the most part, I'm absolutely for running those guys back, including elevating Juleson to the third pair right side.
Or do you get the cheap version of Nikita Zadorov and Brendan Dillon?
It's just going to be so difficult, with Zadorov and what he can command on the open market. Jeff, marvelous stuff. All these questions we have to ponder, and it's getting here quickly, buddy.
Yeah,
the draft
I
is
know.
almost upon us. It's amazing when you go 7 rounds or 7 games second round, as Blake and I were talking about last
3
week.
weeks away.
It really does shorten that offseason and that runway to the draft and free agency. Look forward to this. I look forward to the next Rink Wide. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, guys. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.